Thank y'all so much for coming. We're about to have Chris talk about design and building human-centric applications. But before he does, don't forget to pick up some stickers near registration. And yeah, if you want to talk about something during the open sessions later this afternoon, please put it on a sticky note, also next to registration. All right, without further ado, Chris Sims. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. I want you to imagine with me for a little bit. We're done with this. We're home tomorrow night. We're sitting there, and we're finally going to get the opportunity to crack open a beer and watch that last episode of Picard. Anyone here ready for that? I sure am. If you've seen it, please don't tell me any spoilers. But you open that beer, you're sipping it, you get ready to watch it, and then the internet goes out. You're frustrated, and you know what? We can fix this. We're internet people. We're going to pick up our phone, call our ISP, get some help, and then surely it's going to be a quick thing, but then all of a sudden we're phone trees and getting sent from department to department to department, all to realize that we're not going to get internet back on until either tomorrow on Sunday or Sunday 2 years from now. Anyone here ever experienced that or can identify with that? Let me tell you something. That's not an accident. That experience comes from how an organization is designed. So over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about the concept of how organization design and how we build our systems will impact how we build our software, and not just how we build our software, how we build our customer experiences. We're going to look through the lens of this guy named Melvin Conway and see what he brought to the world and how we can be very intentional about how we design our companies and how we design our processes to be able to build the kinds of software and the kinds of systems that we want. For those that are curious, my name is Chris Sims. I am the co-founder of Kavu. Kavu is a social benefit organization designed to build a more equitable workforce through the lens of agile coaching and training. And if you're curious about what I look like, that is in fact a picture of me. Just in case you're curious. I have over 20 years of experience ranging from tiny, small startups all the way to some of the world's largest organizations. In the last few years, and working with some of those large organizations, I was able to become one of 16 Scrum Fellows, working closely with Dr. Jeff Sutherland in some very massive organizations. And what I saw through that, what I learned through that, is companies that are very intentional with how they build their organizations will have better outcomes than those that stumble into an organization design. So in the next few minutes, we're going to talk about Conway's Law. And no, that is not a Conway Twitty song. In 1967, a guy named Melvin Conway was a software engineer, programmer, systems architect, and he was observing lots of different organizations, lots of different companies, and what he realized is that how we build our companies, how we build our teams and put our teams together is our software would be a direct reflection of the organization. And this was in 1967, he was understanding and noticing this, and this is a concept that has been studied, peer-reviewed, lots of journals, lots of case studies, that if you have an organization that has lots of teams where you're throwing software over the wall, getting lots of teams working on it, you're going to have a system that functions and works that way. But if we can be very intentional about redesigning our system, we might end up with this as a summary. You want flexible and responsive software? Build a flexible and responsive company. Or maybe if you're like me, you might like a visual of this. And so Manu Cornett drew some pictures that I think reflects very much how this design works. Anyone here ever worked with Amazon, with Google, with Facebook, or Microsoft, or Apple, or Oracle? That's how their software works, right? We see that within the organization. Yes, this is a little bit comedic, and definitely we see Conway's Law in software companies throughout the world and software systems throughout the world. And we're going to talk a little bit about some examples and how can we be more intentional about not stumbling into something we don't want, but be very intentional about how we design our organization to design our systems, but not just software. I've had the opportunity to work in manufacturing organizations, marketing and legal and lots of different things. And what I've realized is that this concept of Conway's Law applies wherever you have customer interactions, wherever you build products. And if you want to build human-centric systems that solve human problems, you must first start with the organization and the teams that are building it. So we're going to take a little bit and let's look at Conway's Law in software engineering. And we're going to start with a behemoth. We're going to start with Microsoft. And I want you to take a trip back in time to Microsoft of the early 90s. It was very siloed, not consistent communications, and it's a pretty bad experience in software. We definitely see that. And definitely it has evolved since then. And one of the cool things we see in Conway's Law, you can either stumble into bad or you can be intentional and get into good. But Microsoft originally was an organization that had multiple layers, lots of divisions, and lots of divisions that, frankly, didn't communicate very well together. And as such, if we think back to the Windows Mistaken Edition, did anyone in here use the Windows Mistaken Edition? Had plagued with usability standards. It is constantly joked on, even more so than Clippy. Like the Windows Mistaken Edition is this like nightmare of software, and it was a reflection of the organization that built it. An organization with stability, with poor communication, with lots of siloing is going to build that. Or maybe we're going to go to another behemoth. Anyone here ever had the misfortune of using Lotus Notes? Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Lotus Notes was absolutely one of the most abysmal pieces of software I've ever tried to use in my life. IBM, still a behemoth, still huge, still a market player, was a very siloed organization. Again, lots of silos, very inconsistent collaboration. And Lotus Notes at one point was one of the world's largest, had one of the largest market shares in email and corporate communications, but it was clunky, it was unintuitive. And today, pretty much non-existent. I don't know if there even is anyone using Lotus Notes. I really hope not, because it is just miserable software. These are reflections or examples of how Conway's Law can be seen in maybe not necessarily a positive way. However, there are some other companies, and frankly, including Microsoft and IBM, that have understood that org design matters and have taken that to actually have better outcomes. But let's take a couple of big examples. Anyone in here ever use Slack? Yeah, that was a rhetorical question. Of course we all use Slack. Slack is a very different company. It started with the concept of being very flat, very open communication. There's a concept. This is actually from their culture design workshop. And they had this rule. No communication happens in direct messages. All communication happens in open channels. Now imagine if that is the concept of openness that your company is building. It's no wonder that their software is as open as it is. They built an organization that focused on the user experience. User experience wasn't secondary to them. They tied that into the very culture, the conversations, the way they were doing it. They forced their teams to use the software. By the way, if your teams are not using your software, find a way to do that. Because if they have to work with the crap they build, they're going to make the crap a little bit better. And that's exactly what Slack was able to do. And as such, it became one of the fastest growing companies on the face of this planet. A company that to this day, Microsoft, IBM, and others are trying their best to compete with it, and they've not been able to compete with the level and the market adoption that Slack has. Or let's look at another one that I'm sure everyone in here has experienced, GitHub. GitHub is all about fostering organizations and fostering collaboration. So in their core, they started with the priority of collaboration, of innovation, of adaptability, responding to the world around them, and opening up software so that more people can engage and work in it. As such, they build very collaborative environments, and they built a system that has democratized software development. These are examples, Slack and GitHub, of positive use of being very intentional with organizational design and considering how we want to create teams. And they start with the teams that are building it. And we can learn some things through these lenses. First of all, communications is crucial. We consider IBM, we consider Microsoft, we consider organizations that traditionally have been very siloed, and they build software that has usability issues, and they've evolved past that, or trying to evolve past that. You look at Slack and at GitHub, and they start with intention, and that translates to their software. Next, we need to understand that user experience should not be secondary. Elizabeth at Lunar Labs can definitely attest to that. Start with the focus on the users. Companies like Slack and GitHub understood and engaged the users at their team level, bring them in as part of the concept, and they create software that solves human problems. Not just about making revenue, y'all, it's about solving human problems. And second, or third, adaptability and agility matters. The ability to respond, and how fast can your organization remake itself? If you're the same organization today that you were yesterday, or tomorrow that you are today, that's a problem. That is not how we build responsive software, responsive team, responsive companies. You have to constantly remake yourself. And so agility needs to be in the core of your DNA, the ability to respond and remake yourself consistently. The cool thing I've had over the last few years is the ability not just to see this in software. I started programming in 3rd grade, started getting paid for it in 6th grade. I've been a long-term developer. Most of my coaching and engagement over the last few years has not been in software. It's been in business structures, companies like manufacturing companies and legal teams and marketing and all this, different products. It's stretched me and allows me to understand that same concepts that we use to build great software can be used and translated into your teams. Anyone have, again, back to that ISP experience, don't call Comcast to get help. It is a miserable experience. Hopefully no one in here works for Comcast. I'm sorry if you do, but yeah, that's true. Rigid companies, rigid communication structures result in rigid customer interactions. Plain and simple. If your company is too rigid, your experiences are going to be too rigid. Poor organizational design, poor communications will result not just in bad software or bad systems, it's going to result in bad customer or business outcomes. It's going to make your company struggle to compete, especially in a world with people that understand this and people that are constantly remaking themselves, because Jeff Sutherland, the creator of Scrum, says this, and I think it's a bold thing to say, but very true. He says he invented Scrum to put businesses out of business. And what he means by that is Scrum, a small business using an agile approach, using agility, can respond faster than a behemoth. And you get the Slack stories, companies that can respond and build systems that outperform the older, more traditional things. So agility matters. Can you build your organization with agility in mind? And flexibility is the way to go. And so since the pandemic, right before the pandemic, I had the honor of working with one of the world's largest and oldest, most respected manufacturing companies. A company whose goal is to literally feed the world. So in 2019, I started working with John Deere through their large-scale transformation. You see, in 2018, 2019, they realized that, and actually one of the quotes that their CEO says is that if we do not build an agile organization, we will cease to be a relevant organization within a decade. Now consider that. A Fortune 100 company, a company that's been around forever, that you can go outside, it won't take long to see a John Deere product when you go down the street. They're saying if we don't remake ourselves, we will cease to be relevant. So they made that commitment, and they made that commitment to make a radical change with how they built their teams, with how they built their professional workforce. They needed to move faster, they needed to be more efficient and more responsive, and so they committed to change everything about their organization. We're talking a radical change all the way from the org chart, job titles, even to the physical space. It was fascinating. They would bring teams in, they would move them to Illinois for 3 months, and when the teams went back to their home offices would have been gutted and completely redesigned with the focus of agility, open spaces, open collaboration. They were able to translate that very quickly into the work from home when the pandemic hit. They took those same concepts because they invested in the team, because they invested in flexibility. When the pandemic happened, they were able to handle it. It was much smooth. And through all of the global catastrophe we've seen through the last few years, Deere has achieved unprecedented success. So let's look at some of the metrics of success that they were able to see in the last couple of years and think about what we can learn from what they did and apply it, whether you're a small startup, a mid-sized business, or a huge Fortune 100 organization. So in the last couple of years, John Deere improved their cycle time, the idea of I have a problem till that problem is solved and released. They improved their cycle time by 79%. Time to market decreased by 66%. For every sprint, they delivered 448% more features. Think of your company, your product. The ability to deliver 448% more features to your customers. If features that customers love, that are wanting, they're able to respond to their pain points, and what that might mean for you. They increased their deployments by 567%. Through all of that, they saved 20% across the board in cost, because what they did is they engaged every single employee in every single idea they could bring up. They incentivized that, they focused on it, and the company and team were able to save 20% without reducing headcount. And finally, through all of this, they increased their employee NPS to 60. Now, that is a staggering number for those that might know NPS. An employee NPS of 60 is considered top in the market. That means that 60% of their employees are likely to recommend that, hey, you need to come work for John Deere. It's a great place to work, and you see it every day. So not only do they have these great business outcomes, they created a better place to work. Now, these are leading indicators of success. These are things that we're going to do, output that we're trying to achieve, but here's the business outcome that John Deere achieved. Through the middle of a pandemic, they went from about number 3 in the market to number 1. This is that blue line, that top line there shows their stock price. It is the highest valuation they've ever had, a 200% increase in their stock price. Not only that, they outperformed the Dow Jones Industrial Average. They stomped their competition, which was kind of cool, a little bit competitive, so it was fun to see that. But even more, their mission of feeding the world became more effective. They were able to improve the world around them. That is the power of org design, the power of using Conway's law to be very intentional about how we build. And it is the very core of what we see inside DevOps. DevOps, yes, it's software, yes, it's tools, but even more importantly than that, it is a reorganization of how we build teams, being very intentional of that. And that is what we can learn. And so there are some additional things I would like you to consider taking away. First of all, and I've said it time and time again, be intentional. If you are a startup, if you are starting with a couple people, keep the end in mind. What do you want to achieve? How do you want your user experience to be, whether it be software, whether it be business experience, whatever it is, be intentional and design an organization around that. Build teams that focus on that. Build a team that focuses on open communications. You never know where the next billion-dollar idea is going to come from. And if you have an organization that is closed to communication, that is not listening to your employees, that doesn't foster that open communication, you're going to miss out on vital, important things, on innovation, and on the ability to move and adapt faster. Build that open communication. Silos don't work anymore. Next, build cross-functional teams. Again, kind of back to the core of DevOps, right? We're not building a testing team. We don't have a separate design team and a separate development team and a separate operations team. Let's bring them together and have them work together to solve the problem. Building cross-functional teams allows you to get ideas to market faster, to experiment faster. And the experimenting faster allows you to get information, because here's the reality. If you have an idea for a startup, guess what? Your idea sucks. And that's okay. Your idea sucks. How fast can you iterate? Can you get feedback? And can you take a crappy idea and turn it into a great idea? And you do that by building cross-functional teams that have all the skills they need to release to market quickly and to get that feedback fast. So build organizations of cross-functional teams that foster open communications and be intentional about it, and then iterate, iterate, iterate. You're not going to get it right today. The ability to remake yourself, reinvent yourself, to constantly try new things and adapt is going to be the difference between companies that go out of business and companies that thrive, companies that find the right thing to build. And so this ability to iterate, if you're not a little bit better today than you were yesterday, a little bit better tomorrow than you are today, then you're going to fall behind. If you don't continue to evolve, you will devolve. So iteration is critical, and the only way you can iterate is starting with that org design and keeping the concepts that are vital to you. And finally, be intentional about your culture. You will always have a business culture. If you don't think about that up front, you don't consider it up front, then a culture will find you, and you will get a very crappy culture that no one wants to come work for. By the way, crappy, that is the scientific term. That's why I use it so much. Don't build crappy culture. And y'all, culture is not about getting the segues and the funny names on your conference rooms or the goofy job titles. That is not culture. Those are the tiny things you can do on the outside. Culture is being very intentional about how you design your system, how you build and connect your humans together, and how you build teams that can challenge the world, can make the world better, and can solve human problems. As we conclude our journey through Conway's Law and its impact on both software and on human experiences, I hope you feel just a little bit inspired to take some of these concepts back to your organizations and to apply them to create the next Slack, to create the next GitHub, or heck, even better, create the next Microsoft, but do it right. My name is Chris Sims. I would love to continue this conversation with each and every person here. Please connect with me at my company at ykavu.com or my personal website, Chris is Agile. And I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation and this exploration moving forward. And remember, design matters in every aspect of our life. Thank you very much. And any questions?
Any questions?
Yes, down here.
Hey, so how can little people affect the org design?
Find your voice. Be the squeaky wheel. If you got an organization that doesn't listen, be the squeaky wheel. And ultimately, if you're trying to push good and you got an organization that refuses to change and adapt, vote with your feet. Find the next organization that's going to build the culture that you want to work for. There's tons of jobs out there, great opportunities. Little people matter. The team needs to be listening to you and the organization needs to listen to you. But if it doesn't, maybe that's not the best place to work for you.
The second question is, what is your take on like the team topologies, Manuel Pais, and that whole movement?
Yeah, team topology. I'm definitely not an expert on it. I know that how you structure the engage, all those things matter, but it's not a one-stop, one-size-fits-all. You definitely want to build open organizations, build that kind of thing, but finding the right tools and connections that work in your organization or where you need the guides that can help you be intentional about it. I'm sorry, I just don't have a very detailed answer. I should, because that is on my reading list. I just have not explored it.
You would like it.
Yep.
Any other questions? Oh,
Right there.
yeah.
Where do you see new ventures and small ventures typically go wrong when designing their organization?
Personal experience with Kavu. I'm a scaling expert. That's what I do. I go in and help organizations get really, really large and deal and all that. Well, we started scaling way too early. Had a lot of leaders come in, had a lot of leader titles. And so I started seeing things like, well, leadership says this, which I hated that from the very core because it never needs to be, especially in a small organization, leadership says this. So unintentional ramifications of job titles. Having too much of that, scaling too early, putting division between, and especially in a small business, between a leader and the developers, the people that are solving the problems, that needs to be a very flat, very small structure so you can listen and respond very quickly. Because often as a leader, as a founder, you're going out, you're trying to get money, you're trying to get the next customer, do the next sell. You need to also make sure you're listening to the people that are solving the problems, because they're going to see things before you do. And if you build this structure that separates you from the developers or the team, and by developers, I'm little d developer, not big D developer. I'm not talking about software engineers. I'm talking about people that are solving problems regardless of what their tool to solve that problem is. I think in the early stage, be really, really small, really, really lean, focus on intentionality, and grow small, be slow to hire and fast to fire.
Anybody else? Oh my goodness.
So if someone were trying to find an organization that had a like healthy organizational design, how could they what kind of questions should they ask in like an interview to gauge that?
Good question. Using Conway's Law, I would start by looking and using the software. Is it the kind of software that you want to use? Is it built from good, strong user experience? Is it built in a very open, easy way to interface with? What do they say on their websites? That's a good place to start. Again, just using kind of extrapolating from Conway's law, start with the output, you could predict the input behind it. Kinds of questions I might ask. Tell me the last time that a developer came to you with a problem and how did the organization respond to that? And if they give you something that's superficial, like where the water fountain is or something, whatever the stupid things are, then maybe that's not the right answer. If you hear radical change, creating new product ideas, those things, then maybe that's a little bit better indication of success. Talk about the ways that, tell me stories about how you build your culture. Like, cool, if you say you have a culture of openness, well, tell me stories. Give me 3 stories or 2 stories that indicate you've got an open culture and see how they respond to that. Also, go look on social media, see what their employees are saying and how they're doing, and if it looks like the place you want to work, that might be a good indication. And if it doesn't, go find the next one. There's too many good opportunities out there.
Anybody? Questions? Okay, I got one. How did you solve that problem at Conway? Like when you grew too fast, I mean, was it just you had to fire people or?
Jeez, all right, we'll go there. So the first thing we did is I stripped everyone of titles. There was no longer C-suite, there was no longer leadership, and I, over and over and over, I heard leadership, I stopped that. If I saw people trying to separate out and say, no, like you gotta go through me, I got very, very focused on making sure that that was not the case. You do need to be very intentional about your team. And if you have issues where people are, this is not just Conway, this is in general. Agility, open, flat organizations, not everyone wants to work there, and that's okay. There are people that perform better in hierarchical organizations and top-down leadership. Whether or not that's good or bad, you know, personally, I wouldn't want to work, I don't work well in that. That's why I had to start my own business. Bosses and me never got along. But sometimes it's incumbent on leadership to coach people into a better fit for them, and that might not be your organization. Those are tough, uncomfortable, especially in small startups. Those are really, really uncomfortable conversations to have, but it is vital that you have them to make sure that everyone is fulfilled and fulfilling their duty. So in an employee relationship, it's not just about what the employee is doing for you. Are you giving that employee the satisfaction in the place that they can succeed at what they do? And if you can do that, you're going to have better outcomes. You're also going to have happier employees, and all of that's going to be better. I think I got somewhat close to answering your questions.
You did, thank you. One more, sorry.
Yeah. All right.
We still got time, right? 7 minutes?
I ended early, so
Oh, yeah.
I think I ended early.
Yeah. So I was having a conversation with Vadim last night about the virtues and challenges of a open, flat organization with very few like titles. And I just wanted to get your take on that. Like, do you see this as like a, you know, you mentioned some people wouldn't want to work in that environment, but like, what do you see as the challenges and the virtues of this kind of model?
I think the first thing, if you're looking at kind of Theory X, which is more traditional hierarchical organizations versus Theory Y organizations, which is more the flat that we're seeing. Reality is we have way more research, way more studies on what works in Theory X or hierarchical organizations than we do in flat. Flat is, well, not by no means a new concept, it is newer and not as studied. And so one of the problems, if you're thinking through what are the tools and techniques that work, some of it is very much groundbreaking or exploring, and that can be a little bit scary and risky. Being clear about ownership of responsibilities is important. You can have little titles, you still need to have very clear responsibilities, like I am held accountable, you know, if I'm a product owner in an organization, I'm held accountable by the value we create. Not by how many people are on my team, how big my team is, but directly on the value I create. If I'm a Scrum Master, I'm focusing on building effective teams. My responsibility, my accountability to the organization is how fast and effective are my teams working? Are we busting impediments? Are we growing effectively? Are people happy? That's what you want to see inside Scrum Masters. Or if my role is a developer, I'm there to solve problems. Like, what is the quality? What is the throughput? How much are you solving? Can you see these things? So flat does not mean unaccountable. And so being really clear on accountabilities is vitally important and something that we often miss because we want to go in and, the la-di-da happy, West Coast approach to whatever, and we're seeing that backfire time and time. We're seeing that ripple throughout the organization, regardless of what you think about Elon Musk or Twitter or layoffs going on in Silicon Valley. The idea that we've got to hold people accountable to the value they're creating and be very clear about that is vital. Because if you're not doing that, your company will cease to exist and no one's going to get helped in that. So there's a balance between clear accountability, clear responsibility without the overhead of, I don't have to tell you what to do. I need to tell you where to go. I don't have to tell you what to do. And that's a very tough thing to do for managers, by the way, because managers spend their entire career learning how to tell people what to do. And we don't have to do that anymore. That was like Henry Ford bullcrap from a uneducated workforce. We don't have an uneducated workforce anymore. So now we got to readapt and relearn.
Hey, can we, anyone else? Cool. Can we get a big round of applause for Chris? Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks.